first of all, this is why you're supposed to have Congress involved, is because they're doing all this behind the excuse of classified briefings, so that we can't have these discussions publicly about what this involves, which is, it interests me how much we are currently talking about the Constitution, because the whole reason that the framers wanted Congress to be the branch of government that declared war was because not only is the issue of lives at stake in war, but also they had watched European kings going to war on whims or for religious reasons, or for, their honor had been slighted or whatever. And as they did so, they needed to raise money to go to war. And that inevitably came down to ordinary people in the form of taxes, and just bled them dry. So the framers were determined that Congress would have to have this debate, so that by the time somebody went to war, Congress people's names were on it, and they had to answer to their constituents. Their constituents wanted it. And you can see that Trump didn't bother to do this at all. Again, he didn't expect there to be a war, it appears. And the popularity of this war in Iran is crazy low, like really, really low numbers compared to any other foreign interventions that the U.S. has taken over the last, generation or two. So one of the things that the senators said coming out of that meeting is that the administration, for all that it has gotten huge sums of money for the military, wants to get more money for the military to fight this war that nobody wants. And to me, this is a really interesting moment. So one of the things that happened yesterday, is the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, came out and said that the U.S. has borrowed $50 billion a week for the past 5 months. That's without a war. And at the same time that Trump and his people are saying, we got to have this war, but nobody seems to know why, they're madly cutting back on the benefits that the American people need and want. We're coming into a heavy weather season. We need more people at the National Weather Service. I know you're all tired of hearing me talk about the National Weather Service, but that actually matters a lot in my life. And I'm sure other things matter a lot to you in your lives that are equally important, more important maybe. But at the same time that literally yesterday, the man in charge of the Affordable Care Act, Dr. Mohammad Oz, said that there were too many people on the Affordable Care Act. It's too expensive. He's calling it waste, fraud, and abuse. They're literally talking about more money for this war that is currently costing at least $1 billion a day. And what this does for me is it brings together this real central question of, what are we doing here? Like, is the United States of America, what do you want your tax dollars to accomplish? And it's not simply the policy stuff, like, I want to fill potholes, or I want to go to war, or, it's literally, what do you think your government should be doing? And what we are seeing is a government at this point that is responding to the whim of Donald Trump and not answering to the needs of the American people. And the other piece of that borrowing is, of course, that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that the Republicans passed last July dramatically cut taxes for the wealthy and for corporations. So one of the reasons we have to borrow so much money, even though we weren't at war at the time, was because the money's not coming in, the revenue's not coming in. And again, Trump has really slashed the IRS and the people who were catching the tax cheats and so on, going back to sort of this idea of creating a world where he gets to use America's money however he wants, and he gets to take Venezuela's oil, and he gets to have a war, and he gets to do all this stuff. And it just feels to me like it brings it into sort of crystal clarity that now is sort of our time to say, hang on just a minute here. This is not what we want from the United States government, because we're the vast majority here. And so in that moment, like, there's some really interesting things you're watching. So one of the things you asked was, why didn't the Republicans vote against stopping Trump with a war power, since nobody wants this war? It's incredibly unpopular. And I think there's a number of answers to that. I think one is that some of the Republicans are true believers. That's not where the numbers come from, though. I think the real numbers come, well, partly from the fact that Republicans, especially in the House, are afraid of Trump. And you can see this by the fact that at the Republican House retreat that happened yesterday at one of Trump's properties, when he got up to speak, nobody wanted to stop clapping. They clapped and 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 they clapped. And because nobody wanted to be the one to stop clapping, because they were afraid they would draw his wrath, which is a hallmark of an authoritarian government, that they don't dare to stop showering praise. And why you get these stupid, in every authoritarian government, you get these stupid meetings where they're showering over the top praise on these people, on the authoritarian, because they're afraid of what might happen if they don't. And by what might happen when they don't, I think is a number of things for them, partly ostracism from their club and all that kind of thing. But also, one of the things we are not discussing sufficiently right now, I don't think, is how much money Trump has amassed for this upcoming election. It's not his endorsement you necessarily want, because actually his endorsements aren't doing very well for people. You want the money that he's sitting on, because he's been sucking up all the money that's coming into the Republican Party, all the money that's coming into him, all the money that's coming from all these tech bros. He's soaking that money up, and they want that money behind them. So I think some of it is just the desperate need to claw back money or to get money to run in their races in 2026. Now, that brings up another question that somebody asked, and that's, why are people now leaving the Republican Party to become independents? And that's, again, something really interesting. Some people are finally speaking out because they can't stomach it any longer. Somebody like Tom Tillis, for example, who's the one who went after Kristi Noem in her hearing before Trump fired her. He's not going back he's not running again, and he's not running again because Trump turned against him. And he just figured he couldn't win, not necessarily because he couldn't get any votes, but Trump would back somebody else. He'd probably lose to him in the primary when only the most extreme voters turn out. And now he sort of feels a little bit unmuzzled. That's not to say he's a Democrat, but he's willing to speak up against people like Noem. So you get some of those people. But what's happening with the guy, Kiley, in California, who switched parties yesterday to independent, was really interesting, because if you remember, California redistricted the state in retaliation for Texas redistricting its state in a mid-decade redistrict, because Texas was going to make sure that basically they took 5 seats that were Democratic, and they basically made it very hard for them to win. Although that's itself interesting, because they did it based on the 2024 vote, and that 2024 vote depended heavily on Hispanics in Texas who had shifted to Trump in 2024, but they have shifted back away, so that those gerrymanders in Texas may end up to be what we call dummy manders. That's when you gerrymander badly and you end up losing seats rather than gaining seats. And I won't go too deep into that, but I'll come back to that argument in a minute. Anyway, in California, when California redistricted in rebuttal to Texas, they did not do so permanently. The law as it's written goes through the next, just up through the next. It's not permanent. They made the seats that Republicans held in California more competitive. Not less competitive, more competitive. And what that meant is this guy wants to stay in office. So he figures that he's got a better chance if he runs as an independent. And what's interesting about that is when he came out and said, I'm still going to caucus with Republicans for administrative purposes, but I'm going to have to consider bills based on their merit. Which I thought was really interesting, because that's theoretically what Congress people do, right? Is they consider bills on their merit. They just don't vote the party line. And it's pretty clear that's what the Republicans are not doing. They are, they're going behind whatever Johnson tells them to do. But losing that vote, losing Kiley's vote, was terrible for the Republicans, because they could only lose one vote, and that was their vote. And so right now, the Republicans in the House of Representatives are in deep doo-doo. That's the professional term, by the way. And that brings up something else that you're suddenly seeing out of the Republican Party, both Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson. And that is that they're all of a sudden running hard against transgender Americans freaking again. And that's very revealing because they're trying really, really hard to try and rekindle the culture wars that got them into power in 2024. And immigration is not the one anymore because Americans are really mad about ICE and Border Patrol, even though the Republicans are telling their members not to talk about mass deportations any longer. They don't want people to think about that. Those deportations haven't gone away. They're not getting as much press as they did before because they have tended to be quieter about them since Greg Bovino and Kristi Noem were putting out, videos about them. But they're still happening, and that's something we need to be careful not to ignore. Similarly, those concentration camps still are going up. They're trying to buy those facilities, and those are still very much there. I can't lose sight of that. I was just walking with a friend who's also a historian, and saying how frustrating it is because as historians, we know where this is going, and it's kind of crazy making to have to go through it because people don't listen. The concentration camps are top in my mind, and I'm not letting that one go. Anyway, those things are still going on, and they have lost ground on all the things that are traditionally Republican strong points. They've lost on immigration. They've certainly lost on the economy, and now they have lost on national security. So, Trump's trying to say, well, I've saved you from nuclear war, but every expert says that that's not at all what was going on, and you can't tell us why we're fighting this war. This is unpopular. So Trump is badly underwater on all of those things. So what did both he and Johnson roll out this week? Transgender people. And this, really important to remember that this is a tool. James Tallarico referred to this the other day and said, I come on TV, you never asked me about housing. You asked me about demonizing my brothers and sisters. And that's a great way to think about that issue being used politically. The question is, are people equal in America or are they not? And the fact that Trump and Johnson are doing this to further demonize transgender Americans suggests that they're really desperate, and they're going to be this really for the last couple of weeks now. They've been really pushing the racism, the sexism, and now they're going back after transgender people. And they're also Trump is also really pushing this idea of the SAVE Act. And just to be clear, I'm glad I'm remembering to talk about this. One of the I'm seeing everywhere today ads for people like Susan Collins, who's running for re-election in the state of Maine as senator, saying, this is just logic. All we're saying is you have to use ID. That's not what the SAVE Act does. Of course, you use identification when you register to vote, and your vote is then checked in any number of ways. It's not like you just, pick up a flyer at the grocery store. There are already safeguards in place, and they are run by the states as the Constitution provides. And the question here is what one can use as ID. And again, to be clear, this is classic voter suppression to determine, to say that what you can use as ID is something that not everybody will have. So, for example, in Texas, at one point, I don't know if it's still true, you could use your hunting and fishing license to vote, but you couldn't use a student ID license from college. Well, again, think of those populations. They're very clearly trying to say, sure, we want hunters and fishermen, but we'd rather not have college students, which I think is stereotypical, by the way. That's not the way I think either one of those populations necessarily falls, but whatever. I'm not the one writing those laws. But the trick to the SAVE Act is that what Trump wants, what he is saying, he wants to go for everything. He wants you to have to produce, not simply to register to, an ID to register to vote. To register to vote, he wants you to be able to produce identification that is either a passport or your birth certificate, which matches your name now. And he also wants you to have to produce that when you vote. Now, that's not the Congress, when they put forward a SAVE Act that passed the House, they cut that second part out. Trump wants it back. Now think about that. Do you know where your birth certificate is? I actually happen to, and I carry my passport, so I'm actually good here. But passports are expensive. I think they're $130, and they're not easy to get. They take weeks to get. And most people I shouldn't say most people, because I don't know what the actual statistics are, but I bet a lot of you don't know where your birth certificate is. I know the reason I know where mine is because I had to go online and buy one to get a passport, now that I think about it. And it was not an easy process because, weirdly, I think I've told you this story, I was born in a hospital that is half in one county and half in the other, and I wrote to the wrong county. So I had to apply for the thing online, and then they wrote back to me and they said, we have no record, but you might be in the other county. So then I had to apply there, and then I got it. But because by then I had to have it FedExed to me or rapid mail to me, that too was expensive. So what they're essentially gambling on is that in addition, Trump also wants to get rid of mail-in voting, and he wants to get rid of something else, I can't remember what, is he wants dramatically to cut down who gets to vote in the United States of America, taking the gamble that the people that's going to hit are Democratic voters rather than Republican voters. And the reason he can think that is because women tend to vote Democratic, by a pretty large gap at this point, and the people who are most likely not to have birth certificates that match their name are women. And while we're at it, the other obvious group here is transgender Americans. So what he's saying here is he knows he's so unpopular that there's no way, or he doesn't think there's any way that Republicans will win the 2026 election unless they basically cheat by making sure a whole bunch of people can't vote. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean going backward? Well, so that's what you're seeing here is a man who has driven himself into a dead end. I mean, I literally envision this as an alleyway with brick walls. That means he's desperate. That means he's angry. That means he's humiliated. Those are all the things you do not want a narcissist with dementia to have. He's going to get more erratic rather than less erratic. But at the same time, it's also a moment of extraordinary clarity for the people who are watching this. You know, certainly there are people who still think Trump is the bee's knees, but there are an awful lot of people who supported him in 2024 because they were mad about the economy or any number of reasons who are backing away from him now. What this moment gives us is the ability to look and say, no, I don't want to spend $1 billion a day, and that's in addition to all the money we were already spending, on a war that we have no idea why we're spending it. What we really need to do at this point is to think about what we want in the United States of America and to advocate for that. So one of the things, I do a lot of interviews with elected people because I'm trying to normalize these people. I'm trying to make constituents understand that they represent us, and they're actually trying to represent us. Every single one of them says your voice matters. So keep on speaking up. But I'm going to push that a little further. And I'm going to say, I am looking at the extraordinary money that is going into our elections. So that basically people who can't muster that kind of money don't even bother to run. And that basically the extremely wealthy people buy seats. So there was an expose last night in the New York Times about how much money billionaires are pouring into our system, but also using as an example the replacement of John Tester, a very popular senator in Montana last year, with Sheehy, I forget his first name, who is basically just a tool of the billionaires. He's voting for deregulation, he's voting for tax cuts, he's doing anything they say, and he's not representing the people in Montana, but he's there because he got a ton of money. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, I'm personally tired of just reacting to whatever the hell Trump is doing and whatever the hell the Republicans are doing. I'm over it. And I think that it is time to be more aggressive about articulating what kind of a world we want to see. Certainly what kind of a world I want to see. And that's a biggie for me. The fact that our world appears to have been taken over by some extraordinary rich people who are destroying not only our country, but at this point also the world order, because they were so determined not to pay higher taxes. They put Donald Trump back in office. I'm ready to address that publicly and say, yeah, I'm all for higher taxes on billionaires. And I'm all for getting rid of Citizens United in whatever way we can do that. Now, those may not be your issues, but the reason I say that is because rather than simply reacting to whatever is put in front of us. And I'm not suggesting everybody's doing that. There's a lot of this stuff coalescing, a lot of people talking about things they care about, pointing out the fact that the entire budget for the National Endowment for the Humanities was a fraction of what we've already spent in Iraq. All those things. Pick your lane and just start to speak up about it. Because I have said for many, many, many years now, decades actually, that I firmly believe that most Americans actually want the same things. We want a government that regulates business fairly, that provides a basic social safety net to enable people to live the American dream, to get to have education, for example, and that promotes infrastructure so that we can get to work, or that we can have the internet, or we can do the things that we cannot do ourselves, which is what Abraham Lincoln said, that protects our civil rights so that you don't have to wonder if the federal agents are going to kick down your door and come drag you out of your house, the way we've seen in places like Minneapolis and even places here in Maine, and so that we have an international order where we're safe. And those things that are now the things that the Democratic Party is embracing are honestly were the platform of all political parties until the 1990s and the 2000s, when the Republicans jumped over a cliff and have landed now knee deep, thigh deep, maybe waist deep, maybe higher in fascism. And articulating that and recognizing that that cuts across political lines. This is not about partisanship. Hasn't been about partisanship for a long time. But if you can't look at Donald Trump and recognize that he has just kicked a hornet's nest in the Middle East that's going to come back to bite us so hard, then you're not paying attention. And right now, we really need to pressure those people around him, the elected officials around him, to make him less and less powerful as his power is diminishing. He still has the nuclear football, right? So losing Kristi Noem was a big deal. We'll see who we can, whom we can weaken next, because every person he loses makes him slightly weaker. That's, instead of sort of reacting and standing back and going, oh my God, it's time to lean into it and talk about the world we want and demand that of our elected leaders. Because if you watch the news like I do and you watch commentary like I do, you can tell things are changing. And the more you throw your voice into whichever pot it is you care about, the faster that change will happen. So I'm with you on how tiring this is and how exhausted we are. I think that's part of the plan. If you can't deal with it, it's okay, by the way. Spring's here, get out in your, walk your neighborhood or whatever you can do. But to the degree we can push back on that, not by saying just, hey, you're an idiot, sorry, hey, you're incorrect, but also by saying, I'm in the United States of America. I believe that people should pay their taxes fairly. The same way that the Republican Party said in the Civil War, when it invented, the Republican Party, emphasize that there, invented the income tax, because they believed that every man should pay into the government during its time of need in proportion to his ability. And one of the leaders of the Republican Party said the government had the right to take, not kidding here, 99% of a man's income if it needed it. And that argument, I think, would go a long way to addressing our debt, to addressing how we're spending our money, and certainly to making sure we don't continue to be taken over by a very small group of very wealthy people. Because folks, now is the time. This is the same thing we looked at in the 1850s, the 1890s, and 1930s, and so on. If we are going to restore fairness and justice and safety in the United States, now's our time to demand it. So I hope y'all can keep the faith and can weather this. As I say, I will keep coming on when big changes happen. I was on the road, so I didn't come on when he first struck Iran, but will if more stuff happens. And just remember, we're doing it together. So thank you for being here, and I will be back on Thursday. But before I go, I have one last piece to tell you about things that we're doing. I am extremely excited to tell you that as of noon tomorrow, I am starting along with, no, let me say his name last. I'm starting a new lunchtime series. Right now, it's only going to be once a month because we're going to have to dip our feet in the water a little bit first with Paul Krugman, the economist. We're starting something called Lunch Money because when we had an interview together a few months ago, we had such a good time and it felt like we learned so much that we wanted to continue to try it. So as of noon tomorrow, Paul Krugman and I will be doing Lunch Money, in which we talk about economic issues in their historical context. And I cannot tell you how much this is my happy place. My first book was on the economy of the Republican Party during the American Civil War. I've always cared about economic issues. And finally, I get to sit down with somebody who actually knows the economic side while I know the people side. And I hope you'll join in because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I will see you again on, tomorrow at noon, and then Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel. And for those of you who don't know that reference, that's Batman, 1960s, and what I mean is 6 o'clock Thursday evening. Thanks for being here.